Hey, welcome to the Kingdoms Podcast. My name is Luke and I host this with my buddy Matt Ma. And our goal is to empower you to discover how your faith impacts culture for God's kingdom. To do that, we're sitting down with different men and women from all kinds of disciplines to uncover how they, through their ambitions and vocational skill set, make a difference in the lives of those around them. And so if this is helpful to you, we'd love it if you could like it, share it, and subscribe. In the meantime, enjoy today's episode. Well, thank you everybody for jumping in on this episode. I'm super grateful to have you here and really thankful to have joining me, Meisha Watson. Meisha, thank you so much for jumping on.
Happy to be here, Luke. So excited.
Oh, well, as we were saying before we hit recording, I was like, what's your Enneagram number? You're like, I'm a 7. I was like, I'm a 7. It's like golden retrievers meeting in a park.
Yes.
So I'm pumped for this. It's going to be super good. And just real quick. So Meisha, you're like, what would you say are your 5 most people know you for these things or these talents? Because you're an accomplished woman with a lot of great things going on.
Well, thank you, Luke. I would say people know me from YTV would be the first thing. So
Yep.
I did YTV's The Zone for a couple of years ago. And then Hey Meisha, my children's TV show, which is on YouTube and Yes TV. And then My Single Story, the podcast. And honestly, the 4th one is probably just being loud about my singleness on Instagram.
Hey, all power to you. And well, to those great things you're involved in. What's great is that, so you and I met at a conference we were both speakers at back in February. And most speakers is like, what do you do? And it's like, oh, I'm a pastor at this church. What do you do? It's like, oh, I lead this ministry over here. And I'm like, what do you do? And you're like, well, it's like, this is fantastic. Acting, kids TV, podcasting, all the things, reforming church culture. So all that to say, it's why I circled back with you to say, would you jump on the podcast? So I am really looking forward to what we get to talk through today. And I wonder, Meisha, just to give people who are listening in, to kind of invite them to be like, oh, this is who you are, where you're from, and kind of what your journey has held in bringing you to life in Canada and life in the GTA. I know that you're originally born in the UK, correct?
Yeah.
And at what, 14 years old, traveled, moved to Canada with your family. And I'm a missionary kid. And so I know what intercontinental moves are like, and that it can be really demanding to uproot in one place and try to dig roots in another place and build community. And so I'd love to ask, in that experience of making such a big change at a time in life where often people are trying to kind of consolidate relationships and presence in one space, what would you say, looking back, 1, that move cost you, 2, what you gained through that, and what would be some of the really rich life lessons that you learned in that season that you still draw on today?
Oh, I love that. The experience. I mean, it's been almost 18 years now since I moved to Canada. But when I moved, it's so strange, because when I tell the story, it's almost like anti what most people would say. But I was so excited to leave England, not because I didn't like England, but because all I heard was adventure. You're going to get to go on an adventure across to a place. We'd never traveled to Canada before. My parents had both been on vacation, but I'd never seen Canada. And I'm 14 and not really traveled at that point. So I really believed I was moving to Alaska. I thought I was moving to a winter climate for sure. We were going to be snowboarding to school. That was my mentality. So I was like,
Huskies and dog sleds.
That's it. And we watched a TV show back in the day called Relocation, where it was set in Calgary, and it was set during a time of during December. Oh, so wow. I really did think that was what it was going to be like. So I was all about, the adventure of it. And in getting to Canada in June of 2004, I was like, wait, it's hotter here than it was in England. Now, the most shocking part of that whole experience was that I had a lot of friends when I was in England. As soon as I got to Canada, I realized there's not a person in this country that I know outside of my family.
Right.
That's it. 2 brothers were very tight-knit, and then my mom and my dad. And what I gained was my family to this day are so tight-knit. Like we are incredibly tight knit to the point where a lot of people are surprised by how honest and open I get to be with my family, my parents, about my day-to-day life and how frequently I speak with them. But it's because for a lot of years, it felt like we were the only ones in our little bubble here in Canada. We were learning about Canadian culture. We also moved from one socioeconomic background to another. So we were in, I guess, lower middle class when we were in England, and we moved to upper middle class in Markham, Ontario, because the pound was very strong at the time, and it was like worth double. So my parents were like, "Cha-ching,
let's go."
Yeah, and so in having that change, it was quite a culture shock. You know, we just moved into a place where people just kind of, at where I was, anyways, money was worth something different to the community that I found myself in, right? So I'm growing up in a place where most people are living on welfare. And then I moved to Canada where no one knew what welfare was, or not Canada, but the area I was in anyways. And so, yeah, I gained that tight knit, connection with my family, but in a sense, there was that culture shock of like, where do I fit in this place? Yeah. I was also one of very few Black people at my school. I mean, I have a foreign accent, but British accent's probably one of the best foreign accents you could have. So
absolutely.
That was fine. But yeah, I'd say those are the two things that I'm most memorable from that time in the moving.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. No kidding. And you're right. British accents are pretty fabulous.
I think
pretty
so.
diverse.
I held on to it, man.
True say. Well, hey, so you've moved to Canada.
Yeah.
You're figuring out life in a new context, navigating a brand new culture. And obviously at the same time, high school tends to be a time for a lot of people where they're discovering themselves in a lot of ways, kind of being like, wow, I'm actually like really good at this. I didn't know that. Or I hate this subject in school and I hope I never have to do it as a career, right? You're starting to think more deeply about passions and ambitions and what the future might hold for you. Yeah. And so I know you mentioned this at the beginning, but that you've been involved in TV and media and a host of fronts. And so I wonder, like, because like for people who don't know, like Meisha, you're not just like sit straight, like hold a microphone, like no. You're like you're giving her, and it's fantastic. So for you, when did you start to realize like, wow, I love acting in television, and I'm actually like, I'm really good at this. And not only
that second
making
part
that
took a lot longer. Sorry, I just got to say that this took a lot longer, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's go there then, because it's not every day that somebody discovers a passion for something and then realizes that passion years down the road in what they do vocationally. So yeah, how did that journey unfold of being like, wow, I'm actually really good at this, and this is how I got to being in television, having a kids television show, podcasting?
Yeah, it was a mixture of things because I've always wanted to perform. And my mom actually reminded me recently that when I was 8 years old, they actually put on shows in my house and I would charge my family cash to come to the living room for the show.
You're an entrepreneur.
I really was from day one, always putting on shows, always producing things. So as a producer now, I think like I've been doing it for a very long time. I just wanted people to see what I had created. So if I had to make it myself, I was going to do it. So I've done it for a lot of my life. But you're right. When I hit high school, everyone else was making these choices about their careers. But I had used performance as something that just made me so happy. So I never really saw it as like, oh, this is what I'm going to do for my job. I wasn't like, I'm going to get an agent, move to the city. I didn't think that way when I started off in high school. I was just more thinking, what can I do to have fun at school? My grades weren't great, but I did very well in like presentations and did very well anything to do with communication. So I just did what I loved often. So if there was a play, I was a part of it. There was a dance crew, I was a part of it. There was just any way of performing, I would say yes. I was also the kid that was in every single play at church. Every to play, I was the sheep. I was like, sure, I don't care. I just want to perform. And I think that's kind of like was the budding part of my career, was just saying yes to a lot of different kinds of roles. And eventually when it came time to decide which school to go to, in grade 11, they kind of made, I don't know if it's the same way now, but back then it was like, you have to get this kind of grade to go in this kind of school. And it can be kind of stressful. And I knew I didn't have the grades to go to university. And so I was like, well, I guess my only shot here is if I get into an advanced program for acting. And so I put everything I had in me to be able to audition. I didn't get in the first year. And then the second year I got into an advanced program at George Brown for theater performance.
Good for you.
And that's kind of the beginning of it becoming a career, was like that first audition, getting rejected was the first kind of like, oh, I can't just roll in and have a good time. I've got to like devote time and training to this. And then once I spent a year doing that and getting into theater school and giving that a try, was like, it opened my eyes, like, oh, I'm going to do this for my career. This is going to be it for me.
Can I ask, what did it look like to overcome that rejection? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people who like were thinking, oh, I'm going to sail right into this. And then it's like, nope, not this year. Yeah. There must have been a part of that was pretty crushing.
Yeah, I think that like not getting in was wild because everyone thought it was a no-brainer. So no one was like, usually right now, if I say I'm going for job interviews, people will be like, oh, let's pray with you. Like, you know, we hope you get it, you know, we're believing for it. It was such a no-brainer. Like I was such a performer and I was such the obvious candidate in school, like in my small pond. I was totally the big fish. I was totally the big theater fish. So everyone thought I would get in on the first go. And I'm pretty sure I did a stand-up comedy routine for a serious drama program. So I don't even know what I was thinking, really. Like, I don't even know what I was expecting. Everyone was doing Macbeth, King Lear, and I'm there like, so have you heard the joke where, like, that was literally what I did, thinking I was different, you know.
I bet it was hilarious, though.
Like, no. It could have been. I thought it could have been gold. And they were like, no. I came back with like a poem, monologue written by a Canadian playwright called Jeanette Sears. And I was like, I'm gonna nail it. And even when I went in, I was actually nervous. Now when I perform, I don't even get nervous, I get excited. But I was still proving myself at the beginning. I was still to prove to myself that I actually had the talent. Because when everyone thinks you're going to get something and then you don't, you feel like your identity is at risk. Like the person you identify as is at risk. Yeah. And not getting it put my identity at risk. So the next time around, it's like, if I don't make it this time, like, what am I even going to do? What am I going to do? And so getting it and actually getting to go to college was definitely a confirmation for me. But I wouldn't even say even at that point, it was validation that I was good at what I loved.
That is such a great insight. And when you talk about that sense of identity and like, if I don't get this, it's like someone's cutting the anchor cable. I'm like, who am I and what do I do? Was there some real soul searching in that in-between year between that rejection and then acceptance, especially as it comes to your sense of like self-worth and identity relating to acting?
I would say that there wasn't a crisis, but I think that's primarily because I was really surrounded by positive, hopeful words by people who love God.
Yeah.
So I wasn't in a space where others were feeling hopeless about it. Like everyone's still like, even though in myself, I was like, how could I not make it? They were like, you'll make the next one. It's what God has for you. Like those are the words I was hearing. So thankfully, even though there was this inner turmoil going on, like, who am I? What is my identity? It didn't get to crisis level because I was so surrounded by the truth of God and what he had for my life. And so, and it's so funny because I went to theater school. I haven't stepped on a stage to do a theater performance in a decade. But back then it was everything to me. But I just believe that like, even in that moment, God, I mean, obviously I had to believe God had a plan of where I am today. Like he knew I'd end up here. Now I work in broadcast TV and online and all this kind of stuff. It's not theater. It's not the theater at all. It's very, very different world. But I still had to experience it there, you know, and it will bring me to where I am today. So yeah, I think I answered your question. I'm not 100% sure, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you for that. I'm grateful because I can relate. I think a lot of listeners can relate to moments in life where it's like, man, if I don't make the cut for this sports team, if I don't get into this university, if I'm not accepted for this job, if this person rejects me, like, who am I then? And so there's so much.
Add something to that actually is that I love sports documentaries. I don't even play sports. I barely watch them, but I love documentaries about sports. It seems like when people are trying to become a part of a national league, whether it's the NBA or MLB, or I'm like thinking of what they are,
or NFL or NHL or
those ones. There are moments when they get to a point, and on these documentaries, they always say, I've waited for this moment for my whole life. I've waited for this moment for my whole life. I can't imagine putting everything, and truly, when you are putting everything you've got into becoming a professional and you want to join the NHL and you're going into a draft, or something like that, that day, or I guess it's a couple of days, you're waiting to see if your name will be called.
Yeah.
And then maybe you can go again next year, but that's part of your story, that you weren't picked in the first year. So you put everything into it to get to that point. And sometimes that breaks my heart, because in a lot of these documentaries, they don't get what they wanted on that day.
Right.
It changes who they are forever. And I saw this one documentary a while ago where it's called Last Chance U, and great show. And some of these guys, when they didn't get it, they went back to their neighborhoods and changed their life around for the negative. And I think we've gotten our lives so different that just because you have a failure, it actually could mean the failure put you on your right path. It could have done just that. If you look at it a little bit differently, it doesn't have to put you in a crisis mode or knock you off your game entirely. If you look at it as, you know what, I've still got a plan, I've still got a goal to reach, it just might look a little different than I thought. That's what I would encourage anyone who's trying to do like what feels like the impossible, like the NHL, or even getting on broadcast TV, which to me felt impossible.
Yeah. And oftentimes that adversity is one of the most important elements along the way to forging something in you that will make you that much better when you get where you're going, if that makes sense. So thanks for that.
For sure.
Thank you. That was a fantastic add-on. Like, wow. You're welcome to make any add-ons you want in this conversation.
Thank you, Luke.
So I'm thinking about, well, you know, I was mentioning this too before we hit record, but maybe when you and I, maybe even before you and I were kids, but I can kind of remember as a kid in the 90s, hearing people who just had this kind of like, oh no, danger, no good attitude towards media. You know, television at the time was kind of the big bad, and, you know, halfway through the 90s, it starts to become commonplace for many people to have computers in their homes. And obviously the advent of smartphones about a decade later, and, you know, on and on. And so we're more inundated with technology avenues, whether it's television, websites, social media, podcasts, you name it, for engaging with different forms of media. And obviously you and I would both agree the whole just like, oh, it's dangerous, don't do it, is like that ship has sailed a long time ago as a compelling or even nuanced response to engaging with technology. Now, at the same time, there's a ton of fluff and worse out there, but I think there is a lot of potential in technology, a lot of promise in making content rich media. And so for someone like you who has way more experience in professional media than I probably will ever have, I'd love to know, how have you journeyed through this as a follower of Jesus in terms of being in television, being involved in social media, having a podcast, et cetera, et cetera? How have you looked at that to say, I want to use this to redemptively impact culture? What's that look like in your own life and journey?
It's so great because I love this question, because I got saved. So I got baptized at 14. I got saved like before that. But at 16, I left the church.
Wow. Why?
And a big part of that was I wanted to perform in church a lot. So there would always be like the opportunity to like, and it was so weird. I did a lot of stand-up comedy back then. I don't know. Now that I'm realizing there's a trend. But I remember one time I did a stand-up comedy routine at church in England. And wait, no, I would have been here. Yeah, I guess it was in Canada. And the elders of the church rebuked me for it. Because I was picking on things in like people in the, you know, in the auditorium or whatever, and they didn't like it. And they didn't tell me directly. They just told other people, told my mom, and I was never allowed to be on stage anymore. I couldn't do any worship anymore on stage or anything. No. I was just like, yeah. So as a 16-year-old, I was like, oh, I've been rejected. And I don't like, I believe that I got this gift and I'm serving in the church, but it's looked at this way. And it wasn't soon after that I left the church. I didn't want to go anymore. I graduated high school at 17, not because I'm extra smart, because I am, but because of England, like just the exchange. Anyway, so left when I was 17, and I moved out. I moved out to go to theater school, and so I never had to go back to church. And so slowly, I started falling away from the church, and when I found my way back to church, I was already working at YTV. So I'm in this environment where I'm surrounded by, so where YTV is, it's surrounded by all other networks. It's just a chorus building. So like W Network, HGTV, everything's in the same building. So I'm in this place that like you can't mention the name Jesus at all. And I'm there like newly born again, like so pumped about my faith, like want to talk about church at every turn. Like, did you read in the Bible that said that? Like, I'm that person, right?
Yes.
And the people I'm with, the friends of mine, are like, cute, like, we love you, just keep doing your Bible thing. But on air, I could never do anything that mentioned the name Jesus. And wow. I remember one day where I kind of slipped in hallelujah into one of the characters I was playing. And they all said it was really good and funny. And then they ran it up that flagpole and it got cut.
Ooh.
I was like, wow.
Just
and now
saying
that
hallelujah.
Yeah, I just said hallelujah. It was like hallelujah. It was like something really small. And
yeah.
I'm actually realizing a trend here, because in the beginning of the story, I was talking about how I did stand-up comedy in church and they said no. And now I'm in a secular environment and I say something about church and they say no.
Wow.
And what it ended up making me do was I was like, I have to leave. I have to find a way to create content and continue to make art that I love, but I have to be able to be honest about it. And then I prayed and prayed about that. I took a couple classes and stuff like that. And then Crossroads came calling and said, hey, do you want to pitch us a show? Like, it came out of nowhere, absolutely nowhere.
Quick interjection. For people that don't know, can you give the 30-second, this is what Crossroads is?
I can. Crossroads is a media agency here in Canada. We make 3 or 4 television shows. It's also where I produce my podcast. So imagine just a giant place off the highway that makes content that's all God glorifying.
Boom.
Sounds pretty good, right?
That was a great recap. Yes, back to your thought.
But yeah, so then I'm at the moment where I'm like, okay, I'm coming from this secular place and now making Christian content. My social media is all secular because I wasn't allowed to talk about my faith. So I had to go through this like pull and push about how do I create content that's authentic and honest, at the same time, not losing the people who are already watching my God glorifying content. Even though I'm not saying the word of God, they're listening, they're experiencing the joy and the peace of God through my content, but I'm not saying the word God. And now I'm making content that says the word God really, really loud. And I know God has called me that as well. And just me going back and forth. And I did that for years, just trying to figure out a balance. And it eventually got to a point where the thing that became more exciting to me was talking about God without any holds bars.
Yeah.
And I guess as I've grown in my faith, I've been more confident in talking about it in a way that does seem quite down to earth and relatable. So I just continue to do that. But there was definitely a moment in the middle there where I was like, oh, I'm gaining followers and people are liking me when I don't talk about my faith. And then when I do talk about my faith, there's less followers. And there was a moment of like, what am I going to decide here? And by the grace of God, I picked, well, this is the life I want to choose. I want to be a follower of God. And so I went this way, but it was definitely a pull and push. Sorry, that was a long-winded response, but it was quite a moment there.
A very real journey. So what does the creation then, like, because I follow you on social media, you produce great stuff, really good insights. And I'm interested to know, what does that kind of look like? Because a lot of people listening, if they're older millennials or Gen X and they're on social media, Facebook, the old warhorse Facebook.
What now?
Yeah, right. It'll be like, this is our backyard campfire, or me with my grandkids at the park, right? Which is lovely and sweet, and nothing wrong with that. And then on the flip side, you get like younger millennials like us, youthful people that we are, and Gen Z, and there's more of a trend towards like, these are my biceps post-workout, or this is a bikini on a little paddleboard, or like there's this real self-promotion that can easily sneak in. And I'm not trying to hate on either of those things. If you love working out or cute swimsuits, all power to you.
Right.
But my question is, what does it look like to actually develop content that you realize there's going to be eternal consequence to people engaging with this? And how does that shape the way you use social media? Because I think a lot of Christians, especially Christian young people, underestimate the influence they could have if they were purposeful in their use of social media. So could you speak to that?
Absolutely. And I'll even say, first of all, it's what is the purpose of your Instagram account? What's the purpose of your TikTok? Because for me, it changed. It used to be my album. So I just posted everything on there. When I realized the influence that it could have, I said, well, then there's certain things I will and won't post. For instance, I've decided that when I'm dating a guy, I wouldn't like go on a vacation overseas unless for some reason his family lives overseas or whatever. But I think traveling overseas and like the murkiness of staying in hotels and is not a great barrier. It's not a great, although it's not prohibited, it's not beneficial to having a God glorifying relationship. So online, I'm careful about what I do post in regards to like how I would present it. For instance, like if I post a picture with me and a guy and we're like in Mexico and we're like, right, then a girl somewhere in the world will feel like, oh, Meisha did it. Maybe I can do it. Not to say that I'm held accountable for every single person that sees my post, but I now have chosen that my Instagram is an Instagram of influence. And I actually even wrote it out once. I said, this is the corner of the internet where joy lives. So even in a time where we were in the pandemic and a lot of people were posting things that were so frightening to me, I was like, I need to create a corner of the internet where joy lives, because I needed to be that place where people came to and they went, oh, like exhale, you know? And that's how I operate in every single post. Because even when I have a post and I love the look that day, like I got a cute outfit on, cute shoes on, my hair is done, and I really want to post it, I'm like tempted to post it and put underneath it like Jeremiah 29:11, and do that and just post a cute photo because I just want to post a cute photo. So I do have those moments of like, do I, whatever. But sometimes I'll just post feeling great today, posting this to remind myself for the days when I don't feel so great. And I'm just doing that because I think you're allowed to post photos of yourself and say, hi, this is who I am and whatever. But at the same time, like there is influence there. So it's not, we make light of it sometimes. Like, oh, I'm just posting. It's like, if it is an album to you, then it can be private. But if it's public, then you get influence. You get the opportunity to do what we're called to do in the Great Commission, right? So let's do that with it. So I go back and forth on, like a post. Do I post? Don't I post? Which I'm sure for some people seems a bit of a much, but it's important to me.
Yeah. Well, and it should be. I mean, I have a buddy. He's a firefighter, and he's like super fit, like jacked. And this is like 10 years ago now. We were working out together, and I was like, bro, let's take a selfie, which is kind of the classic. Like, I think guys do this. Like if you're at the gym with a friend who's like more muscular than you, which is very true of this dude. It's like, you want to be like, I'm associated with this guy. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think sometimes girls do this. If like, I've observed this maybe more in high school, if there's like a girl that's like considered really beautiful, they'll be like, I want to make sure I get in a photo with you. Is that fair? I don't want to like falsely.
Literally, I have no idea, which makes me feel like maybe I'm the cute girl, you know?
There's always promise to that.
I'll lean into that.
So all that to say, there's a little bit of that, like, I want to be associated with like muscular people. And he's like, nope, no photos. And I was like, well, like, what do you mean? And he just went on to say that like, he realized how easily his ego and like sense of pride was like stoked by being like, oh, like bench 250 today, like, you know, like that sort of thing. And so he just was like, you know what? I'm doing this, one, because I want to honor God with my body. And two, because if you're getting pulled out of the third story of a building, you want the firefighter to be able to pick you up. Right. So he's like, to honor God and to do my job well. And he's like, and that's it. And I'm not doing this to promote myself or my physique like to other people. That isn't for God's glory. And it's really not good for my own arrogance. And I was like, wow, I really respect that. So we've worked out multiple times since, but you know, no photos. So all that to say, yeah, there's wisdom in that, you know, intentionality. And sometimes what the world says, you know, what you should most promote on social media is actually the one thing that if you're honest with yourself, you're like, actually, this is probably one thing I won't promote in this context, knowing my own heart. So anyways, different decisions for different people. And I can't decide for anybody else, but I appreciate your thoughtfulness and how you use social media. And well, speaking of social media and like discernment about travels, and if you were dating a guy, you wouldn't go to Mexico and all that stuff. Congrats. You recently launched just Valentine's Day, right? Valentine's Day of this year. Valentine's Day. My single story, which I love the irony. It's so good, right? It's like, it's Valentine's Day. let's talk about this because it's super valuable. And so to start at like 50,000 feet, can you share with listeners, like, this is just the heart behind the show? Because like, there's like a million leadership, fitness, self-help podcasts out there, but there's not a lot of people that are like courageously saying like, let's talk about singleness. So what motivated launching that podcast?
Yeah, I always wanted to talk about singleness. It sounds like a disease when you say it enough, and I've said it a lot of times, that word. But it sounds like a horrible thing. And I really love my life, and I've been single for a long time. And I was like, well, I believe that God has blessed me with the life I have. I'm single, and that's not I am single. It's and I am single. And so I was like, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about why that is, why we feel less than sometimes in our singleness. Let's talk about it. And so I just wanted to create a space for that. And I didn't really plan out how, I didn't want to decide the perspective necessarily. I just knew that this was my single story. Like, I knew that I enjoyed my life, and I knew that I will not be single forever. But while I am, I really want to like honor God with the time that I am single. So that's why it's my single story, because it's not, everyone doesn't have the same one. And I just wanted to give a platform to be able to share that. And every single person on my podcast so far has been single, and they share about their whole lives. But man, it is just a blessing to not feel like you're the only one, because sometimes you do.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's kind of the whole point of the podcast. And we did our first season, and we're on a bit of a spring break, and then we'll come back and do more episodes. We're going to invite more dudes in the podcast in season 2, because that was really interesting.
Well, yes, the things you learn when you sit down for deep heart-to-heart conversations is true. So to kind of delve a little bit deeper into that, then it's got to be tough sometimes, because not tough and like, oh, you poor soul, you're single. You're in a culture that puts a tremendous amount of importance and value in having a significant other. We are watching as Taylor Swift breaks up with her boyfriend of 6 years, and within a month has a new boyfriend. A lot going on there. She's a great artist, but it's compelling to kind of say like,
right.
What do we really think about who we are as individuals versus if we have to be in a relationship? What place does romance play in our heart? And so obviously the church is not immune to that. Christians aren't immune to that dynamic in our culture. And so in a culture that tends to really idolize romance, and sometimes in church communities that it's like, if you're not married, people are like, oh, or they're like, I have a niece, which is equally worse. How do you think people that are following Jesus can start to say, hey, like, God has good designs that lead people to marriage, but God also has good designs that result in singleness? How do you celebrate the value of both of those in a healthy way?
Well, for me, it has been accepting when I feel either way. When sometimes I feel like it's a gift, and sometimes I feel like it's a curse. And I feel like that's okay. I just want to find God in both sides, 3 years ago, I would not have felt confident enough in trusting that God had a plan for marriage for me. Does that sound right? Well, I wasn't sure if God had a plan for me to be married 3 years ago. And so it would have been really hard to talk about it as often as I do and to share as vulnerably as I have, because I just really wasn't sure if that would be part of my story. I actually do believe it'll be part of my story, and I'm pretty confident in that. Not because God has like whispered anything in my ear or anything like that, but it's just something that I carry, and it's something that I constantly am praying for, but to the point where I can pray and I've left it at the altar and I've surrendered it. And even though I did that also 3 years ago, it took me a while for me to really, really leave it there.
Wow.
Like, not place it and then be like, just look back like, oh God, did you hear what I said exactly? You
see that? You see that?
Did you? Right there, right by your feet. Yeah, right there.
Yeah, you got it. You want to pick it up?
And so, but now I feel like I've surrendered it. And also I will say, I think if I could give anyone advice in this feeling hopeless, or, when you hear those things like, oh, poor thing, you're single, and you're in those spaces, there are choices that you can make to surround yourself by people who are going to remind you of hopefulness and remind you of the faithfulness of God. And for me, it was quite drastic. I actually left my city of Toronto. I moved to Hamilton. I surrounded myself by people who know the Bible better than me. That's probably the best thing I did. Wow. I'm surrounded by people that when I go, you know that story about that king, and then he had that wife, and then that wife, that they'll be like, oh yeah, King Xerxes and Esther. I'm like, yeah, that's the one. And being surrounded by people who know God so well, and being surrounded by people who are always praying has just stoked the flame in my faith like tenfold. Yeah. And I've only been here for about 6 months, but getting in community where they feel hopeful for you is just so like healing. And I'll say this too, when you hit 30, for a lot of people, they're like, oh, are you okay if you don't get married? Because there's that, like, you've hit 30 and so now you're on the decline. And I get it. Biologically, there's, by modern medicine, maybe you can't necessarily have kids at a certain point, depending on what age or whatever, but statistically. But that's not it too. Like, God has so many plans for your life. Yes. So my thing is, I'm excited about the path God has me on. But the reason I'm excited about it is because of his hope. It's because of his faithfulness. He's come through for me before. I believe he'll come through for me again. But I'm surrounded by people who are reminding me of his faithfulness every day, reminding me of what he's done. My family reminding me of what he's done. And when you just keep hearing that, you might start believing it. And that's exactly what happened to me. And so that's why I'm just kind of able to share about my singleness so honestly. It's just like, I'm reminded of his faithfulness. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. And if I'm understanding you right, I mean, that's really admirable to be able to say, again, if I'm understanding you right in this, God, I have a real desire for this. I know it's good. I long for this reality in my life. And because you're faithful and good, I'm going to bring that longing desire to you. I'm going to surrender it to you. And I'm going to make the most in the season I'm in, even as I live with the reality that I'm not just switching off that desire or switching off that longing. Right. It's not easy to live in that place. It's I would be like, I can't speak for you. I'd be like, Lord, hello, this right here. Let's go. Like snap, snap, chop, chop. Let's get her done. Like, let's make this happen. So that, like, it does speak to tremendous trust. And can you, I don't know, maybe you've already spoken everything you want to that front, but I find myself wondering, like, there's so many young people out there who are disillusioned with God, specifically because he hasn't moved in a way to realize their romantic dreams on their timeline. Right.
Yeah.
And for some people, like, I know people who are like, I'm done, I'm out. Like, I feel like God failed me in this. And so, and it sounds like you're at 180 degrees on the opposite side of that. And
well, so I'll be honest, I just interrupt, but it's just because you're so right in that the disillusionment of feeling like God hasn't presented you with the blessing that you thought he would. I still have days of absolute hopelessness. Like, I can literally have a day, I call them my dirtbag days, when if someone were to call me, they'd be like, she was pretty rude, because I'm just having a bad day when things just seem to have gone my way. And I'm like, God, like, I even said it in the podcast, as I'm saying, I'm remembering, I've racked up all the points for a single woman already. Like, I did all the things that everyone said a single person's supposed to experience this and grow in this way and do all these things. And they said that maybe I'm not ready for marriage. And so that's why, I did all those things, God. And you have
whoever is ready for marriage.
Exactly. Like, oh, great. Bing. And now it's perfection. Like, there's so many lies that are spoken to the season of singleness or the space of singleness, as if it's like a video game that once you complete it, you get to the next one. But some days, those things aren't true. Even if those things aren't the way God sees you, he sees your value always, not just when you get married, not just when you get kids, but he always sees your value. But the days when you don't believe it, like the days when hopelessness and loneliness and the darkness of the world and the lies of the world creep in, on those days for me, and also I live alone, right? So I genuinely have felt loneliness to a point where I'm like, who can I turn to, God? Because when you're single sometimes and a lot of your friends are married, you feel like you can't reach out to them because you're interrupting their family life, and the thing that you want, you hold so dear. So you might not even call them because you're just like, they're like, call me anytime. And you look at your phone and you're like, I can't because they're with their kids right now, or they're at dinner right now, or they're whatever. And so many men and women feel that way. So they don't call anyone. So they sit in their loneliness. And I was doing that so much during the pandemic. I found myself just like weeping sometimes, weeping and just being, what's the word? Resigned to the day. Just like, all right, this is one of those days. And the one way that brought me truly out of it, first of all, was praying really honest prayers with God.
Yeah.
Really honest. And saying every single thing that was on my heart. And sometimes I would say it like, I can't say this to the God of the universe, but he already he knows it on my heart. He knows what's on my heart. So me saying to him, God, like, I don't want to go through another Christmas single. Please don't make me have to get through that whole thing again. Like, and praying that and sitting in that and asking him and, also reminding yourself of who he is. God, I know you are good. God, I know you are faithful. I'm asking you, God, as your daughter, who you have such value for, please present me with my partner to do life with so I can continue to live out the calling you have for my life. Like praying prayers like that, but being as honest as possible, but putting God on the throne, like keeping him on the throne, but calling it what it is. Like, this is hard, and actually putting it there. That's the most healing thing for me has been. So I go from having, 3-4 days of feeling hopeless and lonely to a day. Just going and that's kind of like how it's happened for me. And although even though it's one, as I sit here today, I'm like, life's pretty great. I do feel like I still have those days where I'm like, okay, like I've got to do the things, I've got to take it back to the throne right now, and I've got to call friends because I'm definitely that person that's like, I don't want to interrupt. I don't want to call, but I'm lonely. I need someone to talk to. And I get into those spaces too. So, but that's the best thing I can offer. Just pray an honest prayer.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. In preparing for this interview, Meisha, I came across a quote of yours that I love that I'm going to read for a second for listeners, but I'm wanting to read it in the context of oftentimes, especially in the church, there's kind of a perspective that like women are to be really meek and mild and gentle and like great cooks. And it's, if that's you, God bless you. But it's kind of one-dimensional and a bit unfair to the beautiful array of personalities in women and men. And yet, I think sometimes in the church, it's like, oh, we've got a woman who's got, she's really outspoken, or she's assertive, or she's energetic, or she's got a lot of vision, or she's got great leadership qualities, or you could go on and on, it's like, and there's can kind of be the sense of like, what do we do with this person? As in the case with your elders, the story you shared, earlier. So here's the quote. You said, I'm 5'11" and I have the attitude of an Amazonian 6'4" woman, which I thought was just like a brilliant sentence for capturing like, yes, this is good and excellent. This is who God has made you to be. But the truth is, within certain contexts, it can almost feel like a detriment, which really isn't fair. So for people listening in, whether maybe on the one hand, it's guys who are single and who are expected to be like really like grow beards, take the hill kind of guys, but are more like chill, or for girls on the flip side who are like vibrant and energetic and like passionate, and people are like, you just need to like sit in the back row and sing hymns softly. Like, how do you invite people to say, no, embrace who God has made you to be? And also, how would you say then the culture within, especially the Western church, could evolve to say, yes, we're going to welcome and celebrate and embrace who God has made these people to be, and not try to stuff them into kind of a cookie cutter mold?
Oh yeah. I would encourage anyone who's feeling like an outlier in their church community to make their voice even more heard. I think that it doesn't necessarily mean being the loudest in the room, but I do think that finding your allies in the room and showing them what God has what God has shared with you. Because I think that, and this is just being real. I've been doing this for a very long time, but I had someone recently approach me and she said, I know that you're really joyful and all that, but you don't have the anointing on you to do what you're doing.
Oh,
and
yikes.
It really, I know, it really like cut me. I was like, oh.
You punched her in the throat, didn't you? No,
right from the elbow. No, I didn't. So, it really caught me because I wasn't expecting it. I was hosting, I was like moving, I was like so vulnerable because I was in my element, so happy and everything. And I realized that like, I'm surrounded by people who remind me of what God has blessed me to do. So I do have I have gatekeepers. I really do have gatekeepers. So I don't know. I don't have a lot of experience outside, especially in the church context. I mean, as a Black woman, yeah, I've definitely been in contexts where I'm like, here's how I would carry myself in an environment where you are the only, and people consider you to be an issue. But as a woman in the church experience, I've had my allies. I've always looked for my allies, looked to my left and my right to see who's nodding along with me, and who's a friend or who's a foe. And I'm really always kind of open to meeting new people. And I start off feeling like everyone's on each other's team. But what I've seen over this while in ministry is like, people will use the word of God to cut you deep, and even when I say from a platform, a lot of things in regards to church culture, so not having women preach on stage, I didn't know that. I come from a very, very long line of female elders.
Got you.
Great grandma, grandfather, grandmom, mom, me. So we never even looked. We were like, "Oh, you need someone to stand up in church and to ensure that things are going, or whatever, working right, or whatever, some sort of leadership." They looked to my mom and my grandma and that was always the story. So I've never felt like it wasn't my place, but I've always felt like people did feel like I was a bit much in that environment. And I still get that today. And I think often, which sounds so strange to say to another Enneagram 7, but because I'm a happy person, people think I'm not that bright a lot of the time. So when I'm telling a story,
thank you for saying that. Yeah, it's like,
yeah,
just because we're happy-go-lucky doesn't mean we're stupid.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so I think that is more in the church. Yeah.
My theory is that if you're overly like positive, people just assume you're really out of touch with reality. And is that what you've experienced? It's wild for me. Think. Yeah. Because it's like, yeah.
It's like you haven't been through anything. You haven't experienced any hardship. So that's why you're able to be as happy as you are. Because it's shocking to people that you can know what's happening in the world and yet still have joy. But that's literally what God promises. He himself gives us joy. So when people ask me, how are you so energetic? I'm like, I'm not energetic. I mean, I do get 8 hours of sleep a night. So that does a lot of the work.
It's wise.
Which most people don't get, which is wild. But God gives me that joy and that presents itself as energy. People feel that way. So I'm like, upbeat. I'm like, yeah, because every hardship I've been through. And let me tell you, as a Black woman in ministry, I've been through hardships. Yeah. But at the same time, like I feel so much joy because I've experienced so many blessings along the way. And it comes across as lighthearted or, she's just not that smart. But at the end of the day, I look at it and I go like, even if that's the case, I'm okay with it. Because even if you got a little bit extra joy today and you thought of me in whatever way you wanted to, I'm okay with that. Because again, I'm going to take what you give me and I'm going to be like, joy. I'm going to present it back to you in joy. And that's how I've always been.
Yeah. Really quick to double click on something you said a moment ago. To be a Black woman in the church, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
And we don't have time to unpack everything, but I would just ask, when people have come alongside you as allies, and for people listening in who are saying, hey, I've never thought about what it would be like to show up as like an outgoing, energetic, not just woman in the church, but a Black woman in the church. There's a lot there. What could I do to be an ally to the Meisha Watsons in my church? What would you say?
Oh, I love that question. I have been able to show up as myself in my brand new church. I just got there a couple months ago. And within a month, I was invited to people's homes. I got to spend time with their children. They made me a birthday party for my birthday. They planned summer vacations with me, added in. So I'm the single person. Yeah. So often when vacations happen, the married people, they plan their family vacations, but they thought of me. Okay, but Meisha, what are you doing? Come along. I don't drive because I'm a Torontonian at heart. That's our city. For those of you who aren't from Canada, that's not our city. So I take transit nonstop. So they pick me up. Let's pick up Meisha. Let's go. And so and I want to be clear. Most of those people are white in the friendship group. So when they think of me, they just think of me as their friend that they got to take care of, that they want to follow through on. When we said we would be your friend, we said we will be there. We'll let you be who you are, and we'll let you be the big personality, or sometimes the moody personality, or whatever version of myself I'm willing to present that day. They've accepted me as that and gotten to really know me. I think sometimes people think that with allyship, you have to do a lot of study and research, but we're right here. Getting to know people for who they are is what it looks like to be a good ally, because you'll know how to care for them, you'll know how to love them. I've always said that when it comes to racial diversity, it's really easy if you get into a community and just get to know them. I spent a lot of time in the Filipino community because I have a lot of Filipinos who are around me. And when I go to their house, they welcome me in. I learn new words. I learn about new food. And that's really all it takes. It doesn't have to be read every single book on the counter. We would love that. But if I'm honest, I haven't read a lot of the books on the counter regarding race relations in Canada or what have you. I just think it's about the love factor, and it's also about just letting us be ourselves. And the church environment, I think the reason there's a lot of what's the word? Friction. Church community in regards to race conversations and things like that is because of the change. It looks a little different. I remember I've experienced in my church in England, it was a Baptist church, and it looked more like a Pentecostal church in Canada. So when I went to a Baptist church in Canada, I was like, oh, this looks really different just based on worship alone. And I realized, oh, it's a little bit different over here. Let me experience that. Let me get to know more about what it's like over here in Canada, going to this kind of church or that church. And I found myself more comfortable in a Pentecostal church, but at the same time, I was like open, like, let's get to know everybody and love them the way they interpret love,
Man, there's a lot there. That'll have to be podcast interview conversation number 2, but thank you for that. So I'm interested to know, given your experience, given your insights into the church, given the fact that you know what it's like to be a part of a church community in England, and then here in Canada as well, if you were to be speaking to, whether it's a group of young adults or singles in a church community, what would be your wisdom to those who are saying, I really want to pursue a romantic relationship, but I'm not sure where to start or what it should look like? Because, I mean, it's crazy to think about, but when I interact with some of the young adults in the church I serve at who are singles, I realize that on the one hand, they're very aware of this hyper-progressive hookup culture that many of their peers are engaged in, and they're like, wow, don't want to go there. But then on the flip side, what seems to sometimes be the only alternative is a sometimes very conservative, like, courtship culture within the church, where it's like, we're both 25 and we want to go to Starbucks, but like, your mom is coming too, or it's just like, wow. And so it just feels like there's this massive divide between those two realities that so many singles are trying to figure out and navigate today. And so, as you think of saying we want to honor God in our romantic relationships, and there can be other ways of doing this, is there maybe a third way forward in the midst of those two extremes that I've highlighted, that you would say, hey, like, maybe calm down, like, this is the way forward? What would your wisdom be?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, definitely calm down should be step one, because I do think that when it gets to dating, everyone gets a bit nervous. I mean, even to have a singles ministry event, the church is always like, well, what does it mean? What is it about? Like, who do we accept? What is it? There's so many stipulations around singleness in the church and creating ministry around that. My greatest advice, if you're a church leader who wants to encourage God-glorifying relationships and dating practices in your church, is to talk about it. A lot of churches now are having these, like, let's say a young adults meeting or something, that they will do the relationship goals, like, conversation. But they're not actually talking about singleness. They're talking about how to date once you're in a relationship, how to get on a date. but there's also the preparation in between. For instance, if you're on a dating app, which I think go for it, but put God before you get on that app. There should always be, and I'm being really like rules based here, which is not my intention, but just because this has worked for me, when I pick up the app, which essentially is a gateway into just dudes. There's just dudes out there, right? It's not necessarily a guy who, all the guys there are Christian and, attend church in the way that I like every single Sunday and like serve on team, whatever. It's not necessarily all of that. It's just dudes that the algorithm is showing you. And so I recommend right before that, like studying your heart and just preparing yourself for what you're about to do. And I'm not saying it needs to be some serious thing, but I always pray right before, because sometimes I'm looking to go on a date, and other times I'm looking for a guy to double tap my photo and say that I'm cute, because that day I'm not feeling so great about the way that I look. And so I go on the app for that affirmation from a guy. And so what I've done is ensure that there's that gap right before, and it is lethargic, lethargic. What is it? Exhausting? I don't know. What's the word I'm trying to say? No, the opposite. Like it is a
fatiguing.
It's fatiguing to each time be like, because the app's so easy to get onto. You pick up your phone, click, you're in. Well, I'm asking you to add another step right in the middle. That's prayer. And I get you want to just do it because it's quickly get on the app. But if you are really looking to date someone and find someone who loves God and you want to grow in your faith with them, then putting that prayer before it is actually setting you up for success, because you're just going to view your experience a lot differently. I remember dating when that app started coming out in the beginning, and I'd just be like, swipe, and never land on anyone I wanted to go on a date with, delete the app, and then back 3 months, I'd do it again. But now when I put that gate in the front of it and I say, I'm going to date for a couple of months on the app, and I'm going to put that prayer before I go into it, I've had that much more great, like fulfilling dates. And I met great guys who have then said, these aren't my guys, but I can connect you with these girls. My guys, I'm like, no. But and I think that's because of prayer. It's because my heart was in a different place. So even though I didn't see things that were for me, I saw things that could be for others. So I just saw it a little bit differently than I just need to be told that I'm pretty that day. So that's the app way of doing it. And then also creating a singles ministry where they can actually communicate, and also not making it just for young adults would be good. Statistics show that millennials are marrying later and later in life and having children later and later in life. So the likelihood is your leadership team is probably full of millennials, probably women, who are single. And when the young adults get to the age of 28 or 30 or 32, it starts feeling a bit uncomfortable for women over the age of 30 to be in those conversations, because it really does change when you hit that 30 gap. For men and for women, people just expect you to be married. And so the expectations totally change. So the conversations are kind of different. So when you're starting a singles ministry, just be mindful of that. And then, apps aren't evil. There's they have every possibility of not being good for you, but they also have every possibility of being great for you too.
And it might be a great tool to be a matchmaker. What you said a minute ago.
Oh, yeah. Right? Like, I actually met someone recently who's a Christian matchmaker, and I have to pick their brain or have them on the show one day, because I was like, what? That exists? That's cool.
Yes. I don't think I'm gifted in that space, but I think some people are. But it's not me. Well, so to that end, Meisha, when you talk about different communities in the church and being attentive to not just limit things to specific age groups, a bigger piece to this whole conversation is that we talk about the church as the family of God, or, brothers and sisters in Christ, that kind of language. And I think we don't often take the time to stop and say, what does this really mean? What are the implications of this for my life in this community with other people? And it's really beautiful to think about the early church and how, you read in Acts, they had everything in common. There's this like togetherness. They're eating meals together almost every day. There's this kind of sense of no one is left behind. And so when you think about the church, and especially the church becoming like true family, whether it's those who are single or married or widows or widowers, or those who are single again, what would you speak to in saying this is how the church can really be a family that creates a space of belonging and connection?
Yeah, I think it is looking for the outliers in the room. That's how the church can be more of a family, is when you're in your service and you go to your same pew and you're worshiping with your same friends, look to your left and to your right to the person that came in at the back with no friends, but they're giving it a shot. And they might not be willing to come to the front for prayer, but they might need it. So look out for those people because they're there. The conference I was just at recently, they created a party of one section. So that was for places where people would come in, and if you didn't have anyone, you would sit in the party of one section. That was the biggest section at the conference, because not only were they filled with people who came by themselves, but it was also where people who wanted to connect those people went over as well. They were like, oh, I know that over here, they need connection. They want connection. They're here for that. And so that's where I'm going to go. And I mean, that can be, organized in an awkward way too. So you got to be careful with the way you say, hey, people who came alone, this is your area. But there's great ways of involving them in that. And I think that for me, that's been the best way I felt connected to my community, is because they looked for me, they searched for me, they thought of me, they considered me, and they followed through in community. They didn't say, my first week, let's go for coffee. We did one coffee and never heard from them again. If you can't do the coffee, that's okay. But do what you get, offer what you can to actually make that person feel connected, and follow through. If you say you want to spend time with that person, get to know them, go and do that. And if maybe you don't have a connection there, find someone they will, but actually make that connection and follow through. I think that's the best way that we can become a church. We can become a church that is more unified than we are separated.
Yeah. Yeah. Look for those people who you can say, hey, how can I make this a context where they can really belong? Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Well, Meisha, anything else you would like to add in our conversation today before we land the plane?
I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I just want to say, just getting to talk to you has been great today. And I think creating more spaces where we can share about what God is doing in our lives is exactly what we need. There's no one way to live life as far as the way God has called you to live your life. What I mean to say is, God is actually going to bring you on a path and you on a path. They're all going to lead to him, but they're all going to look different. So creating spaces like this when we can share the various ways in which God is leading our lives is beautiful. So thank you for doing what you're doing, and thanks for having me.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you, Meisha, and for what you've shared and for what you're a part of. And with that in mind, for people listening, if they're saying, I want to follow Meisha on social, I want to check out her podcast, I'd love to scope out her website, where can people learn more about you and your work and engage with you online?
Oh, yeah. So you can find me at www.meishawatson.com, or I am Meisha on Instagram. And the name of my podcast is My Single Story.
Boom. Perfect. Well, I would encourage listeners, go for that. And Meisha, thank you. I'm really grateful for you and for what you've shared with us today. And yeah, for the good conversations I know people will be having as a result of what your insights have kind of piqued in their minds and hearts today. So thank you.
I'm glad. Thanks, Luke.